at the American Folk Art Museum, we like to do a quilt show every couple of years if we can. We have such a deep archive of quilts. There are endless stories to be told through these incredibly powerful objects. Our audiences especially love quilts and respond to them. We always know we can count on lots of engagement for our programs. They're really special, especially most, but not all, quilts were made by women. And so these objects have a capacity to tell stories of women's lives at a time in history when more traditional documentary sources that tell women's stories weren't happening. The idea behind a quilt at its most fundamental level is that it's supposed to keep you warm. But as quilting develops as an art form, there are certainly examples that were made more for show, more with presentation in mind. For instance, in the United States in the mid-19th century in particular, you have opportunities for women to enter their handiwork into competitions at a local agricultural fair or a craft fair that start to become popular around that time. And so the more complex examples that you see that are really dazzling, those were often made with some kind of public or community presentation in mind. Fundamentally, quilts are 3 layers. So we have a back, we have a middle, which is called batting, the insulation that makes the quilt warm. And then we have the quilt top, which is usually the most decorative component of the object. We do have quilts in our collection that are not technically quilts. That is to say, they might just be summer covers and they don't have actual insulation in them. But that is the technical definition of a quilt. The quilts collection within those larger collections consists of over 600 objects. So that is a very large sub-collection within the museum's art collections. And it's really wonderful to be able to work with it because it is so deep. We have examples from everything from the late 18th century all the way up to the present moment. And although my personal remit as a curator is actually to cover usually just the earlier 18th and 19th century objects, with quilts I get to do it all. So I get to do up to the 21st century, and we even have examples of quilts made by living artists. We actually, about 30% of this exhibition consists of newly acquired quilts, whether through donations or through purchase. And I would say that quilts are so personal. People have them in their attics. They've brought them down through generations. We frequently get phone calls from people we've never spoken with before saying, would you like this quilt? And it's not so rare for us to say, yes, we absolutely do. What we look for, because we do have such a depth of examples in our collection already, is something unique, something that we can use to tell a different kind of story, and or something that is just so aesthetically dazzling that you cannot turn away from it. I'll just tell you a little bit about this example. We wanted to start the show with this particular example, which is a Tree of Life quilt. And what I think is special about this one in particular is it's not exactly what it seems to be. So you can recognize in this undulating form actually a much earlier design, such as the ones that you see in Indian palampores. This becomes very popular in Europe, in particular in the 18th century. And you might look at this and think that this is older than it is, but actually when you zoom in and you start looking more closely at the fabrics, you see some old fabric has been used, but there are some instances of brilliant green, brilliant orange. These are clearly synthetic dyes. And we start to realize, oh, this is a hybrid object that was actually made during a time of quilt revival in the United States. So it's very important to preserve these textiles by especially keeping them out of the light, keeping them in, and I say this from our perspective as a museum, of course. If you have quilts in your personal collection, you may have some different decision-making considerations. But we generally keep our quilts boxed in acid-free boxes, and we limit their exposure. So if we have something on view in an exhibition, then we'll want to give it some rest, some time to be in the dark, some time to not be hanging. We hang quilts in such a way that they're attached at the top. They're not attached at the bottom or anywhere else because that would put undue pressure on the textile. This is an incredible example of what's called a white work quilt. And as you can see, it is all white, although we really wanted to demonstrate for our visitors, just because something is white does not mean that it did not require intense amounts of labor to make it this color. White is a color. No natural fiber is pure white in this same way. So before the end of the 18th century, when chlorine bleach is patented, there's an intense process involving all kinds of nasty chemicals. Not that bleach isn't also nasty, but quicklime, potash, soaking in these solutions and then laying them out in bleaching greens. This particular example, which I think you can really only appreciate fully when you see it in person, is spectacular, I think, not only for the obvious reasons of these beautiful decorative motifs, sunflowers, cornucopias, but even just this profusion of white dots spread across the entire surface of the quilt and all along the border, so finely executed, and also the tiny diagonal stitches throughout the quilt. In the previous gallery, we were talking a bit about color, sources of color, and lack thereof, if you will. In this gallery, we wanted to open up for the visitors a discussion of floral motifs in quilting. There's so many examples of quilts that have floral or other botanical motifs in them. And of course, they're very beautiful, so we can understand why people would gravitate towards that. But we also wanted to point out, on a deeper level, women in particular in the 18th and 19th centuries were very engaged with the natural world on a daily basis. They were finding the resources for their daily lives in their kitchen gardens. They were engaging in botanical studies. Actually, botany was one of the few sciences women were encouraged to participate in the 19th century, during a time when many other sciences were off limits to women for reasons of gender. This particular example is special because of the narration of the Adam and Eve story that you're seeing around the center of the quilt. So here we have the biblical tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. We have Eve and the serpent, and she's taking the apple here. Here we have Eve giving the apple to Adam, and then they're being expelled from the garden. This is actually, although it might look celebratory, it is actually a memorial quilt. So those different squares refer to deceased members of a community, and there are inked inscriptions that offer different verses or other representations of a particular deceased member of the community. And when you look closely, you can start to recognize some of the visual language of that theme of mourning. We have weeping willows throughout the quilt. And in the 19th century, weeping willows were very visually associated with mourning. They still are today, but in particular, in the early 19th century and the late 18th century, we start to see examples of young women working on mourning pictures made of needlework or watercolor. This really resonates with those themes, even though this was made a bit later in the mid-19th century. There are quilts that were made with leftover scraps from other projects, but there are absolutely quilts as well that were made using intentionally acquired fabrics. And we see that quite a bit in what are called whole cloth quilts. Whole cloth quilts are a different kind of statement of conspicuous consumption, because it's saying I was able to order this huge swath of fabric all in one color or all in one pattern, rather than having to put together little scraps. This example, as you can see, is made up of a combination of printed cotton, which otherwise known as chintz. Chintz is a Hindi term originally, or it's derived from a Hindi term that originally just essentially meant spotted or embellished cotton. And also chintz has often a luminosity to it, a kind of glaze that you can see maybe when you can see the light bouncing off these top squares here. But this quilter, or actually this pair of quilters, decided to add another element, which is every other square you're seeing is painted by hand with the use of a stencil. And so this is actually referring to another art form that was popular for girls and young women at this time period, called theorem paintings, which you might make at a school. And these were paintings that were done on fabric. So this is an example of a whole cloth quilt, and that's to say it's not made of lots of different pieces of fabric. It is made of one large piece of fabric with the same pattern on it. Whole cloth quilts were actually very popular in the 18th and early 19th centuries, at this time when fabric and importing fabric to the United States was especially expensive. To be able to have a full piece of fabric like this to make your quilt really showed that you were affluent, that you had access to resources.